I'm going to let everyone, I'm letting everyone in. Hello, hello, hello. If you can
Hello,
come on.
hello.
Hi, Saul. How are you?
I'm
Hi,
good.
Joe.
How about you?
Good. Why don't you get on screen? Everyone get on screen so I can introduce you to our guests today. Hi, Blima. How are you?
I'm fine. How about you?
How is Brazil?
Well, it's a little bit crazy, but we're surviving.
Okay. And Ursula, can you come on with your video? And Hetty, the same.
So I have to click on video?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Oh, and then you have to straighten your camera out because we're looking at your nose above. There you go.
Okay.
Perfect.
Nice
Well,
to meet you, Jeff.
Nice to see you too. And I want to introduce you to Esther Gilbert, who's somewhere on your screen. If you wave there you go. And Esther, we're honored.
No, that's me. That's Ursula.
And Esther is, I don't know if you hate being told this, like I always say that you're the widow of Sir Martin Gilbert. Maybe that's not appropriate to always bring up, but why don't you take it away? I invited guests to hear a little bit about your backstory and a little bit why you chose to talk about the presentation you have today, and then we'll go live at 10 o'clock.
Thanks, Jeff. My literal backstory behind me are some of Martin's books. He wrote 88, and these are some of them with some of his foreign editions. And in fact, there are quite a few in Brazil. The Brazilians really appreciate his work, which is wonderful. He was always very proud of his foreign editions, and it's great to see him in different languages and being read in different places. What can I tell you? I've just moved to Canada, so I've just unpacked my books and put them on the shelf, so I'm finally feeling settled, and that's exciting. I'm in the mountains and it's snowing, so I'd show you, but it's a little bit far. So this is where I am. In terms of why I picked this topic, I guess it's something I've been thinking about for a long time as to Holocaust education and how we can do it so that it's successful. And with the rise in anti-Semitism, somehow they don't seem to be balancing each other. Holocaust education in some areas has done very well, and in others not so well. And whether there's a connection to the rise in anti-Semitism, I don't know. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I haven't really come up with much. Well, you'll hear my talk, but then maybe afterwards we can discuss how to take it forward, and what would be some of the solutions or some of the ways to.
All right, so I'll ask this simple question because it's a cheeky question and maybe some cheesies, but everyone likes to know how you met Sir Martin.
The short story is I got lucky. There's a longer story, as you can imagine. We were corresponding for a number of years. I met Rudolf Verba. I was living in Edmonton, just north of here in Canada, 40 years ago. And I met Rudolf Verba, who had been one of the escapees from Auschwitz. And I was hoping to have the Canadian government honor him. And I wanted to get him the Order of Canada, and it unfortunately didn't work out, but I wrote to everybody who had written anything about Rudolf Verba. And that's how I came in contact with Martin. And unfortunately, the Order of Canada thing didn't go through because what he did as a hero and as a historian isn't one of the categories that's recognized by the Order of Canada, which is like an honor in like a CBE or OBE in Britain. But eventually I met Martin at a book launch, and then we started corresponding more, and eventually we got together, and my life sort of changed. And he became ill. He died 6 years ago. And since then, I was working on his estate and trying to keep his books in print and in different editions and different languages. And it's been very exciting, and it keeps me busy and keeps me out of trouble.
Maybe you could talk a little bit also about how you're carrying on his legacy.
There are two ways, really. The main way is through his website, and I do monthly newsletters with excerpts from his work and insights from me about him and about his work. And also, we have set up in London the Sir Martin Gilbert Learning Center, and Bethany, who's with us, is our associate director, and she's running things. And because of the pandemic, one of the good things that has come out of it for all of us is that here we are on Zoom, and it enabled us to have a really an international audience. And we present programs, seminars and classes and one-off lectures on areas of Martin's interests: the First and Second World War, Winston Churchill, the Holocaust, Israel. And it's a fairly new organization, and we're growing and open to ideas. And you can find out more on Sir Martin Gilbert Learning Center.org. Is it .org? .org.
Yeah.
Or on martingilbert.com, which is my website. And my monthly newsletters also have a section on the Learning Center and what's coming up in terms of events in the next month or so.
And for your newsletter, Esther, are you following again Sir Martin, or are you writing on topics that you enjoy on your own?
I try and do every month something that is pertinent to the month that's coming up. So something that sort of has some connection. For the December newsletter, I did an excerpt from him on Pearl Harbor. And then I also have different insights from me or different things that are going on in the world. I do a fun thing called web sightings. So if Martin is listed somewhere on some website, then I have that with a quote and the link and a book that would have connected him to that web sighting. It's fun. It's a combination of his work and insights into him.
And while I have everyone here, I will let everyone know that you're coming back to present to the group on March 6th. And you're going
February
6th. I can never get that right. I've got too many programs I'm working on.
I'm sure.
February 6th. And maybe you can talk a little about the program that you're doing as well.
Martin was part of a film crew that went to Europe in 2009, filming righteous diplomats who saved Jews before the war and in Hungary during the war. With each place we were, and we went by train, it was quite an amazing journey. With each place we had a descendant of the diplomat and the survivor who had benefited from the diplomats' visas or documentation. And it was a fascinating trip. And it became a film called The Rescuers, Heroes of the Holocaust, which is somewhat available. And I think we'll be having people see it beforehand. And then I will come in February, please, Jeffrey, on a Sunday, I think, to the first Sunday in February to talk about some of the experiences and some of the people. And
yes, it's February 6th for everyone. So if you want to save the date, you want to.
Michael King, the filmmaker, who's an African-American, interestingly enough, and became very interested in this topic, is now doing a second film focusing on diplomats who weren't covered in the earlier film. So he's now gathering information, and that's something also to look forward to and maybe to talk about.
Well, we have a nice crowd gathering here, so we'll just keep the talk going a few more minutes. Let people get on. And I wanted to introduce you. Thanks. And Couch, nice to see you. You're from Canada, right?
Yeah, yes, Jeffrey,
Where are
it's a
you in
pleasure to
Canada?
be.
Esther's
Yeah,
Esther's in
so
Canada as well.
if I could just show you the windows outside, the snow, there was a massive snowfall, and it's just getting thawed very much in Atlantic Canada. And first, I would like to, I would like to point out a slightly tragic fact that unfortunately our country was quite hostile towards Jewish refugees. I'm sure you've seen my articles on Holocaust, and it's a deep regret that our Prime Minister has formally apologized for turning away the Jewish refugees from the St. Louis ill-fated voyage. And many of them were doomed because they were forced back into Europe. It's very different than my country of origin, India, which has always been very friendly to Jews for 2,000 centuries. And in fact, the one of Maman Maharaja went out of his way to adopt 300 Jewish children from Poland. He's been commemorated. But in Canada right now, I mean, of course, we love Canada. I'm very proud to be Canadian. We have a wheel of conscience in Halifax, as a matter of fact, the city that I live, to try to commemorate that tragic event and to remember. And I want to share a picture of that, but it is in the Holocaust site, and its wheel is of conscience. It's called the Wheel of Conscience, and it has a profound message. I think it was designed by David Siskind, and it came at a time when Trudeau formally apologized for the.
I have to stop you there. Why don't you put the URL in chat for everybody?
Let me try to see if I can.
You can do that, and then I'm going to start the program because
Sure.
We hit the 10 o'clock and we have a nice crowd coming on, and every minute someone else is coming in. I also want to acknowledge that Benjamin Midler here is a survivor who is on screen somewhere in the tiles. We also have Ursula Duba, who is not Jewish, but I consider her a survivor as well. And she's very into causes of the Jewish world. So Ursula, you can raise your hand. Benjamin, you can raise your hand so people know where you are. Joanne Gilbert is with us today. She's a consummate Holocaust educator. So Joanne, if you can raise your hand as well. I saw that Jan Landau is here. So Jan, if you can unmute yourself and say hello. I want to give you 2 seconds to introduce you. So Jan, are you there?
I am here.
Okay,
Thank you.
Jen, nice to see you. Jen is the co-founder of the Butterfly Project, which is a beautiful project which teaches K-12 students about Holocaust education. So I wanted to recognize Jan here. So I am going to start the program first with my little tech talk. Obviously, we're on Zoom. It's a technology. If you should happen to lose your connection, just feel free to click on the same link that you got in originally. I'm standing by the admit board, so I will see you and readmit you. Obviously, Esther's program is going to be first given. And then if you have questions along the way, please put them in the chat, and you can find the chat under the More button in your dash panel here. It's under the 3 dots. It's marked chat, and you can just add your chat there. I'm also monitoring chat. We'll take those chat questions and open up the mic after Esther's finished, and then you can talk directly to Esther. Also, if you notice, if you click on the reactions button in your dashboard, you'll see that where there's a bar that says raise your hand. And I have just raised my hand, so my hand is up there in the screen, right above my finger. And you can, if you're ready in the questionnaire, because we have multiple screens, I can't see everybody, but if you put a hand raised there, I can quickly go through the screens and point you out and then call on you. So any questions about that? Great. So here we go. So I'm honored to bring Esther, and Esther's been a fan and a good friend of mine, and has really been part of a number of our programs. Esther is the widow of the late historian Sir Martin Gilbert, and she'll be speaking today on why is this night different from all others. She'll be asking questions. Is the Jewish aspect of the Holocaust important? Is the Holocaust education an antidote to anti-Semitism? Hold on a second, I'm trying to multiply two things at once with the admitting people at the same time. And following the discussion on the Holocaust education, anti-Semitism, and potential reasons for the disconnect, we'll have a Q&A. Esther is a member of the second generation survivor who has been involved in Holocaust commemoration and education for nearly 40 years. She has studied Sir Martin's work, traveled with him throughout North America and Western and Eastern Europe. In the early 2000s, she produced a series of books, Holocaust Memoir Digest, which uses published survivor memories to study aspects of the Shoah. Since 2015, she has produced monthly newsletters for Sir Martin's website. Each newsletter focuses on one of nearly 36 available books and 9 historical atlases with topical excerpts from his work and blogs by Esther. Esther is also involved with Sir Martin's Learning Center, which is in the UK. And his historical reach, the Holocaust, Israel, Jewish history, the First and Second World Wars, Winston Churchill, 20th century history, and many of them are on Zoom. So I'm honored to bring Esther to our group. And Esther, why don't you introduce yourself and take it away?
Thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey. You've done a great job of introducing me. I'll just carry on. I know that we've only just come through Hanukkah, and some of us have now finally cleaned our Hanukkah menorahs from the candle wax and put them away. And it's still a few months until Passover. But my question is, and I think it also pertains to the Holocaust in relation to other genocides, why is this night different from all others? I'd first like to give you a bit of the history so we're all on the same page, and then talk about why, spoiler alert, I think the Holocaust is different. Then I'd love to have a discussion on whether Holocaust education is or can be an antidote to anti-Semitism, and I'd love to hear your views. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to my family, which if I can do this. Just a moment. What's going on? Sorry. Why is it that these things always work really well in the practice?
Why don't you just close it and start it open and open it again?
And then there we go.
There you go. Good for you.
Okay. There we are. I'd like to introduce you to my family. They are the reason I'm here today. This is my Aunt Dina. She's the little one there with my mom. This photo is dated on the back, the 26th of April, 1939. This is my Aunt Dina. She's there with my mom in the center of the photo with an unknown couple walking on the outside around the two sisters. What I love about this photo is how normal they look. It's not a posed photo, but a moment of levity captured in time. It was taken in Uremche, in the Carpathian Mountains, where the family went for a brief holiday, dated also 1939. I found these photos after my mom had died, so I don't really have any more information on them. This was taken in 1939 in March at my parents' wedding. My parents were there with my mother's parents, Beryl and Esther Haya Shapiro. My grandparents were about 50 at the time. This was taken at the same time with my mother's two sisters, Mindel and Dina. Dina would have been about 11, Mindel about 20, and my mom 21. Thank you. I grew up hearing that my mother's family had been exterminated. I didn't know what exterminated meant, but I knew it must have been something pretty bad because they weren't around. Trying to figure out what happened to them and to the millions of other Jews during the Shoah has been one of the driving forces of my life. Sometimes it becomes too much, too overwhelming, and I have to draw back and catch my breath. And then something comes along and draws me back. Since the 1980s, I had read Martin Gilbert's books and newspaper articles, especially on the Holocaust. I wanted to meet him, to thank him for giving us our history, if not our specific family history, then the general history of the Jews of Europe, especially during those terrible years. Eventually, I did meet him, and amazingly, we kept in touch. At Martin's suggestion, I began a project called Holocaust Memoir Digest that Jeffrey mentioned. It uses excerpts from published survivor memoirs to study what happened across a range of geographic locations and experiences. Of the 21 memoirs I included in the digest, I was privileged to meet, to know, to correspond with 15 of the survivor authors, some of whom were quite well known, and some who had written of their experiences only for their children and grandchildren so they would know what happened. So the question becomes, how are we, as the next generations, meant to go forward with this personal and yet sadly universal history? I used to approach it in my talking about the Holocaust, that the Shoah is a lens through which we see the best and the worst that human beings are capable of carrying out. It is a way to view the full range of human experiences, given that some of those experiences were beyond ruthless savagery and barbarity, more inhuman than human. But more and more, I'm starting to feel that the Shoah is singular because it happened to Jews. It was an attack on Jews and an attack on Jewish values. And the response to this attack has been a Jewish response. I'll come back to this theme, but my sense is that Holocaust education has not been an antidote to anti-Semitism. And that may be because we've taken the Jewish aspect out of the Shoah. Maybe we have made it too universal. About 30 years ago, in fact, only a few years after these discussions, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Really ahead of myself. Okay, we're on track. I remember when the US Holocaust Memorial Museum was being built, and there were discussions about whether the museum should focus on the Holocaust specifically or be more universal and include other genocides. Many of you probably also remember those discussions. About 30 years ago, in fact, only a few years after these discussions on the museum had taken place, my father died. Jeffrey organized a fascinating discussion a few months ago on how the Shoah has affected the next generations of survivors psychologically. And he had some very fascinating psychologists on to discuss. Well, after my father had died, I started having stomach problems. And then when nothing medical was found, I had some sessions with a psychologist. The bottom line was the acceptance, and even now it is hard for me to say this, that what I lost in my childhood was as important to me as my mother's loss was to her. I'm not sure I do accept this, but what I took from it is that pain is not comparable. To a survivor in Rwanda or Cambodia, Bosnia or Armenia, or now in Myanmar, What that individual lost was huge to that person. It cannot be compared. So do we need to say the Holocaust and? I just don't know. It may be something to discuss later on. What I want to focus on now is based on the idea that this night is different from all other genocides. My interest is the history, and here I married the historian. Martin and I had 12 years together. We traveled together, as Jeffrey mentioned, throughout North America and in Western and Eastern Europe, including the towns and villages in Northwest Ukraine, where my family had lived. He involved me in every aspect of his work, and I tried to soak up whatever I could. See if we can start the screen share again. This photo was taken of us in 2009, leaving the Grunewald Memorial, the train station from which the Jews of Berlin were deported. It is a very powerful memorial, and if you ever have the chance, I would recommend a visit there. When did what we know as the Holocaust really start? Did it start on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland? And this is a map that Martin's done for his Second World War. You can see the black area is the area that the Soviet Union took of Poland, and the white area is what Germany, when it invaded Poland. So that's September 1st, 1939. Did it start on November 9th, 1938, when every synagogue throughout Germany was destroyed in what was called Kristallnacht? This comes from Martin's book called Kristallnacht. He mapped the places, and there are 15 of these maps showing every place, every town or village where a synagogue was destroyed during Kristallnacht. Did it start on September 15th, 1935, when Nazi Germany codified their racial laws and excluded Jews from German citizenship? Did it start on March 22nd, 1933? Sorry. When the first prisoners were brought to Dachau. And this is a map from 1938 showing Dachau, Buchenwald, and Sachsenhausen, the three main concentration camps. Or did it start on January 30th, 1933, when Hitler was appointed chancellor and established the Third Reich? So already we've seen 6.5 years of a totalitarian regime. But wait, it didn't come out of nowhere. 11 years earlier, is this okay? Are you seeing all this other stuff around, or?
No, you can just hit your green button in the top left, which will blow up your screen.
Sorry.
On the left, go to the green circle. You see red, yellow, green all the way in the corner?
Yeah.
Okay, click on that one right there.
Ta-da, sorry.
Okay.
I'm eventually getting into the 21st century.
No worries.
11 years earlier, in March 1922, Hitler established the Youth Party of the Youth League of the Nazi Party, which in 1926 evolved into the Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls. By the end of 1933, a year after Hitler's rise, there were 2 million 10 to 18-year-olds in it. By 1936, joining was no longer voluntary. The young people of Germany, the non-Jews, were inculcated in Nazi propaganda during their formative years. And as we know, it didn't take much to unleash the hatred they had been fed. What developed into the Holocaust consisted of 4 systems of attack on Jews that evolved as Germany gained power and territory. Legally, beginning with the Nuremberg laws, in which German Jews lost their rights as citizens, they had no recourse to appeal the injustices against them. Jewish teachers, professors, lawyers, doctors, municipal workers, overnight lost their jobs. Those underneath them were promoted, and it didn't cost the German government a penny. And who's going to complain at that point? This would be a pattern throughout the war and make a huge economic difference to Nazi Germany and its war-making capability, both financially and psychologically. Jews had their possessions stolen from them, as we see here after Kristallnacht. As the war progressed, many were forced to work as slaves in untenable conditions to further the German war effort. They contributed against their will much of the parts and labor to keep the German war machine running. The German public and German collaborators were the beneficiaries of Jewish possessions and clothing, which further strengthened their bond to the Führer. German industrial organizations were the beneficiaries of Jewish and other slave labor. The original Nazi Party plan was to separate German Jews from German society and exclude them from all aspects of German life. The approach to the solution to the Jewish question of how to get rid of Germany's Jews was initially through immigration. Jews could leave if they found countries to take them in. Two things here. They could leave, but they had to leave most of their assets behind. Also, remember the 1930s were a time of worldwide depression as countries tried desperately to recuperate from the death and destruction of the First World War and the crash of the stock market. Did these countries need immigrants using up their meager resources and taking the few jobs when there was so much unemployment? Doors creaked open, and we shouldn't minimize the fact that half of Germany's 650,000 Jews emigrated and survived. And these maps show where German Jews, the top map where they found havens in Europe and the bottom one in other places beyond Europe. In considering what might have been done more to help Jewish refugees from Nazism, look at our own borders today. The United States beset by migrants camped on its southern border with Mexico, migrants making perilous journeys across the Mediterranean Sea to reach Europe, and recently in unsafe rafts trying to make their way across the English Channel to Great Britain. That doesn't even take into consideration those millions living in refugee camps today. For those Jews who could not find countries to let them in, Nazi Germany was strengthened in the thought that no one cared about Germany's Jews, and thus they could act with impunity. In September 1939, Germany attacked Poland and conquered it in a matter of days. The war had begun and all borders were sealed, so there was no escape. Austria and the Czech provinces of Moravia and the Sudetenland had already come under German control. By 1940, Germany had established the second system of attacks on Jews, the formation of ghettos where food and medicines were severely restricted. By the end of 1940, 4,000 Jews were dying of starvation and disease every month in the Warsaw Ghetto. This map shows only some of the ghettos that were established as Germany conquered more territory. In June 1941, Germany attacked the Soviet Union, nullifying their non-aggression pact, whereby Germany had taken Western Poland and the Soviet Union had regained its former Tsarist holdings in Eastern Poland. With the German invading army, specially trained murder squads, the Einsatzgruppen, or Special Task Force, who came with them and rounded up Jews in towns and villages and took them to nearby ravines and forests where they were machine gunned to death. A faster method than murder by starvation and brutality, and the third system of assault on Europe's Jews. My family came from the then Polish region of Volyn or Volhynia, in what is now northwest Ukraine. It had been Tsarist Russia when my father was born there, then it became Poland when my mother was growing up, then Soviet occupied, then German occupied. Jews lived with Poles, with Ukrainians, and with the odd Cossacks rampaging through, stirring up pogroms. The Germans had friends in that part of the world: Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians, Ukrainians, and some Belarusians. Between their anti-Semitism instilled in them by the church and the naive belief that Nazi Germany would give them independence from the hated Soviet regime, these nationalists felt more aligned with Nazi beliefs. They were willing collaborators in extermination. Among those millions exterminated were my grandparents, Beryl and Esther Shapiro, and their daughters, Mindel and Dina, along with countless other members of the Shapiro, Goldberg, Fleisch, and Bick extended family. By the end of 1941, the Germans felt they needed another approach to mass murder for the Jews of Western Europe, who had been living under occupation but in relative safety. The Germans felt that the French and Belgian and Dutch, Italians and Greeks would be less willing to help in the murder of their Jewish neighbors. They needed another method of killing. In January 1942, the heads of the German government ministries met at the beautiful Wannsee Villa near Berlin to finalize a plan, the final one, the final solution to the Jewish question. In 2009, Martin and I were involved in a film on diplomats who were able to save Jews. We filmed in the Wannsee Villa. I'd like to play a short 4-minute clip from the film, The Rescuers, Heroes of the Holocaust, because in it, Martin describes succinctly what happened there on the 20th of January, 1942.
So this is the room where it all happened, where the fate of more than 3 million Jews was decided. The 20th of January 1942. Among the people who came here, Adolf Eichmann, he had been responsible for the first solution. He had been in Berlin, in Vienna, in Prague, supervising the immigration of more than 350,000 German and Austrian Jews. But when war came in September 1939, other solutions were felt needed as almost 3 million Polish Jews came under German rule. And so this gentleman, Reinhard Heydrich, head of the SS Security Service, the SD, he thought up the second solution: put the Jews in ghettos and starve them to death over 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. That was a cruel solution. And here we have Dr. Rudolf Lange, one of the 8 doctors of jurisprudence who were at this meeting of 14 experts. Dr. Lange was one of those who participated in the third solution: mass murder with machine guns, murdering people town by town, village by village. And it was Lange who was one of those who led to the fourth and final solution. Because Lange complained to Berlin that shooting people with machine guns, shooting 50,000 people, they didn't have enough ammunition. It was a waste of ammunition. He said, my SS men don't like shooting at people of our German culture. They don't want to do it. Some of them have iron crosses. They won in the First World War for bravery fighting in the German army. We must find some other solution. And so Heydrich organized this meeting to decide on a final solution. And each one had a different part to play. They were discussing the methods of extermination. Should it be by gas? Each one had a different expertise. Should it be in trucks with gas vans? Each one was very meticulous. Round the Jews up in the streets of France and Holland and Belgium and Italy and Hungary, all over Europe, deport them great distances, send them by train somewhere in the east. No one need know what it is. It's unknown destination. And organize all the numbers on those lists, all they could find, all they could round up, all who couldn't hide. And in most of the death camps, all who arrived were murdered. There's no photograph in this chamber of horrors of the man who initiated it, Adolf Hitler. He said, Jewish question, to be exterminated.
I said to Martin once that I have a vague idea of the size of the United States, but I don't have a sense of the size of Europe. How big was the occupied area? And how many places were Jews forced to flee? And how far was their hope for refuge? So Martin made a map of German occupied areas on top of a map of the United States and Canada. You'll see it goes from San Francisco to Washington, DC. So to recap, the Jewish question, how to get rid of the Jews, the four solutions, separation and immigration before the war, ghettoization, Einsatzgruppen murders, and the final solution, deportation to an unknown destination that was somewhere in the East and was in fact to death camps, Chelmno, Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka, Auschwitz-Birkenau, all in German-occupied Poland, and Mali Trostenets in what is now Belarus. When we think of the Holocaust, we are talking about nearly 6 years of war, of constant fear and desperation with very little respite across an area nearly the size of the United States. That alone separates it from any other genocide, the geography, the sheer number of days. But why the Jews? Why this attack on Jews, this attempt to annihilate a people and a culture? And why do I say it was a Jewish response? Jews had lived in Europe for thousands of years. Let me see if I can. Sorry. Come back to me. For most of those thousands of years, they had been subjected to hatred from a religious aspect, as Christ killers, as non-believers who killed Christian children to make Passover matzah. With emancipation, Jews had an opportunity to better their lives if they changed their names and converted and assimilated. As a response to this, in 1849, the German publicist Wilhelm Marr coined the term antisemitism to change the focus from Jewish religion to Jewish peoplehood. Jews were then seen as a race who could not convert to throw off their Jewishness. Racial views were prevalent at the time, during the Nazi, especially during the Nazi rise to power, not only in Germany. Their plan was to create an Aryan master race with pure Aryan blood. Jews didn't fit the profile. So first, the reason was race. Secondly, Jews were a convenient target. They were a minority, and a minority in every country. They had done well financially, and even those who didn't still had something to contribute, something to be confiscated and given to the neighbors, a bicycle, a pot, a pair of boots, a warm coat. And thirdly, let me see if I can do this again. I'll get it before we're done. See, I'm learning, yay. Primo Levi writes in his book, Survival in Auschwitz, If This Is a Man, a country is considered the more civilized, the more the wisdom and efficiencies of its laws hinder a weak man from becoming too weak, or a powerful one too powerful. But in the lager, things are different. Centuries after Rabbi Hillel gave his student balancing on one foot a succinct answer about what is in the Torah, not to do to others what is hateful to him, Primo Levi's answer is also a succinct description of Torah and Jewish law. Yes, it could be any civilized society, but it came first from Jewish law. Why do I say the response to the Shoah was a Jewish response? What does that mean? I'd like to mention 3 ways that Jews responded that is different from how other groups may have responded. First of all, Jews are people of the book. To go back to our Passover analogy, the ancient Jews spent 400 years in Egypt. They left, and what did they do? They compiled a book about it. Where is it written is a primary Jewish question, either from rabbis to their students or children to their parents. Jews document things. It can be no surprise that one of the earliest books on the Holocaust that any of us read was Anne Frank's diary. She documented what it was like to be in hiding, what she was feeling, what they were eating, when they could use the bathroom, what it felt like for her. Jewish documentation during the Holocaust is seminal and was a dedicated effort among Jews in Poland and elsewhere to write and record, to paint, to draw, to leave some sort of record of what was happening to them. And the proliferation of books after the war, memoirs, histories, in-depth documentation, film, and artwork that depicts the times is astounding. No other people have so documented a concise period of time and what their experiences were. In part, it is to remember, to memorialize, to teach, and in part, it is to have a record of what happened. There was a strong sense of community, the sense that whatever happens to the community will happen to the individual. And this is the second Jewish response, I think. The Shoah was an attack on Jewish peoplehood, and Jewish people responded in the main by clinging to what set them apart. Ghettos had educational classes for children, religious services, and classes for those who were interested, artwork and libraries, and vocational training when it was possible. This against a backdrop of brutality, starvation, disease, slave labor, and devastating fear and loss. The human spirit prevailed as long as it could. Humanity prevailed as long as it could. The Nazi German aim was to break that spirit, destroy the humanity that cares about the weak. And look who prevailed. Finally, the Jewish response can be seen after the war. Years ago, I had a friend who was part of the Vietnamese community who had come to Canada in the early 1980s. At that time, there were young Vietnamese gangs terrorizing Canadian cities. I asked my friend what that was all about. He told me that these young people bring the problems of the old country to the new one. Also, young people in particular who grow up with war have it in their bones. It takes time in a peaceful environment for that anger and hatred to subside, as we've seen with many immigrants who've come from war-torn lives. Were there Jewish gangs after the war? Certainly young Jewish survivors had every reason to terrorize those who had killed their families and destroyed their lives and their world. A few young Jews did, but in the main, they set about getting the education they had lost. They built new homes in new countries. They married, they had children. They put faith in life and in the world to want to bring children into it. In the main, they dedicated their lives to remembrance of their families and their communities. In the main, they dedicated their lives to the Jewish community and to Israel, to tikkun olam, to healing the world. They knew only too well how much healing was needed. The struggle they continued was to dedicate themselves to Judaism, to Yiddishkeit, to Israel. To recap, the Jewish response during the war was one of documentation while the atrocities were being carried out. It was to be found in various types of resistance, physical resistance wherever possible, by fighting with the partisans in the cases when the Soviet partisans in the East allowed Jews into their ranks. Resistance also came in the form of what has been called spiritual resistance, religious and educational endeavors, cultural, artistic, and even in just survival. The Jewish response after the war was found to be in community, whereby the survivors built families, communities, and dedicated themselves to their families, to those communities, to Israel, and to Holocaust remembrance and education. I've just spent the last 17 years in the United Kingdom, in London. There, the government and the Jewish community and others support nationwide Holocaust educational programs. Teachers are trained, curricula is written, survivors travel the length and breadth of the country to speak in schools. Something like 30,000 British high school students have gone on one-day trips to Auschwitz, and several museums are dedicated to Holocaust awareness and education. And yet anti-Semitism is still very much around. Yes, there are political forces and events, and since Brexit, when Britain left the European Union, it has become more nationalistic and insular. The COVID pandemic has added stresses to every ethnic and economic group. And yet anti-Semitism is still very much around. Recently, I read Dara Horn's book on dead Jews, People Love Dead Jews. It clarified in my mind what I've been thinking about for some time. I wonder if in making the Holocaust universal, in saying that these are the ways human beings are capable of acting and responding in the best and worst of all possible ways, we have made Jews into an illustration, maybe even a stereotype of victim and survivor. And on the other side, there are perpetrators and bystanders. We've gone into the realm of sociology and criminology and moved away from who these people were and why there was an orchestrated campaign across a continent to wipe them out. Jews then are known only for being victims, like those unfortunate souls who get killed in traffic accidents. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or the migrants whose names and stories are only known after they die on their journey to the West. But this is also wrong. Jewish students in universities in the UK and elsewhere are facing unprecedented amounts of anti-Semitism. The original Jew hatred was about religion. Jews had not accepted Christ or Muhammad and were therefore targeted. They were attacked for their religion. The next Jew hatred was about the Jewish sense of peoplehood. They might convert to Christianity, but they could not escape their Semitic race. This is the original concept of anti-Semitism. Now it is Israel and Zionism as an excuse. There are three main aspects of Judaism, how it differs from other religions. First is the Torah, the history of a family, its origins, and the codification of laws that govern behavior. The second is a sense of connection, community, a sense that if a Jew is hurt or honored in one part of the world, Jews everywhere feel the pain or the pride, a sense of peoplehood. The third is the connection to the land where Judaism began, a land where the history is rooted, where the tree of Judaism took root and is now watered by pioneering desalinization plants, the land of Israel. This third and most recent hatred is anti-Israel. Israel is an inflammatory subject, even among Jews. The politics is a discussion for another time. Israel's relationship with her neighbors is complicated and beyond the purview of this talk. What I find of particular interest is the amount of venom that even mention of this tiny country unleashes well beyond its region. And this venom is targeted against all Jews. Those who pray facing Jerusalem, those who don't, those who have Jewish sounding names or wear Jewish religious symbols, or those who don't, those who travel regularly to Israel and those who have never been there. Like the Jews of the early and Middle Ages who were murdered for not accepting Jesus, like the Jews during the Holocaust who were murdered for not being racially pure, Jews today are targeted for having a real or some perceived connection to Israel. It's no different. It's hatred, and like all hatreds, it is beyond reason. Holocaust education was meant to put an end to all of that. I fear the reality is that it hasn't. Instead, anti-Semitism has morphed into anti-Zionism, anti-Israel sentiments and attacks. Jews, as Darahorn writes, are all right as long as they're dead. The ones still living who claim a connection to Israel, it's become open season. So the question becomes, can learning about the Holocaust keep people from hating each other, keep people from hating Jews? And if so, what can we, Jews, second generation, Holocaust teachers and educators, what can we do to talk about and teach the Holocaust that will indeed inoculate students against anti-Semitism? My sense is that we're good. My sense is that we've taken Jews with their Torah and their community and their connection to Israel, religion and culture out of discussions about the Holocaust. We have viewed Jews as examples of humanity, but examples who have documented their experiences and who have taught us about memory, Jewish concepts, by the way. We've failed to teach who these people really are, who they were in the 1,000 years before Hitler came to power, who they are now. There is a sense that if people are going to hate, to target others, to have a scapegoat, a concept Jews originated, by the way, education will minimize that. So far, education has helped to make humans civilized, but maybe we have stopped short. Can learning about Jews, Jewish history and culture, Jewish religion, keep people from hating Jews, keep them from being swept up in the tide of anti-Semitism? The jury is still out, but while they're deliberating, I'd like to offer a potential solution that is at this moment being put into practice. Belarus is located in Eastern Europe, between Lithuania to the north and Ukraine to its south, in the heart of what was known as the Jewish Pale of Settlement. Many Lithuanians and Ukrainians were ruthless in their murder of Jews and loyal collaborators with the Germans. Belarusians, by and large, were not. Originally known as White Russia, Belarusians sided with the Soviet Union against Nazi Germany, and in the main were more willing to allow Jews into their partisan units and look the other way at Jews hiding in the forests. If you've seen the movie Defiance about the Bielski brothers' family camp, that was in the forests of northern Belarus. After the war, Belarus became a Soviet Socialist Republic. Jews who had survived, along with non-Jews, were not allowed to learn their history or maintain their religion, as those living in other Soviet republics were also not allowed. Their pre-war history, their Holocaust history, was denied them. With the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991, Belarus became independent. Many Jews emigrated to Israel, many did not, but their Jewish heritage and religion and culture was in the main lost. A UK Belarusian endeavor is changing that. The Together Plan seeks to reinvigorate Jewish communities by helping those communities to establish themselves. Jews and non-Jews are together building a Jewish heritage trail through Belarus, rebuilding Jewish cemeteries, commemorating mass murder sites, and hoping to reclaim synagogues and communal buildings. Both Jews and non-Jews are learning together about Jewish heritage, religion, and culture. I've invited the head of the Together Plan, Deborah Bruner, to talk a bit about what they are doing. My sense and hope is that by bringing non-Jews into the recovering of Jewish life, by learning about the Holocaust, by learning about Jewish culture and religion, along with Jews, this may well provide an antidote to anti-Semitism. I'd like to turn over to Deborah for a few moments to tell us about what they are doing in Belarus, and then we can develop that further in the discussion afterwards. Deborah?
Thank you. Absolutely fascinating and always a pleasure to hear you speak. And thank you for welcoming me here. I haven't prepared a script. I am going to just tell you a little bit about myself and about the work that we're doing. As Esther said, we are a UK-based charity, but we work in Belarus. Belarus is our focus. The mission of the Together Plan is to revive Jewish community life in the former Soviet Union in whatever guise that looks like in a post-Soviet environment. We are not, our aim is not to tell communities how to rebuild their lives. They need to do that for themselves. And what we have discovered over the years of working in the country is that we need to give people a voice. And I spent many years traveling to Belarus before the Together Plan was actually set up as a charity in the UK. I have a co-founder who lives in Minsk. He's Jewish. He actually left the Soviet Union after the fall of the Soviet Union as a 12-year-old and went to live in Nashville for a couple of years, where he, not really knowing what it meant to be Jewish because he was a child of the Soviet Union, was immediately put into a Chabad school by his uncle and had a bar mitzvah. And when he arrived, he didn't speak a word of English. So culturally, it was a shock, but he made a true connection to his Judaism. He ended up going to Israel and coming back to Minsk, and has dedicated his life to helping rebuild some connection for Jewish people in Belarus, to reviving, to telling their story. Now, as Esther said, Jewish people were not able to tell their story after the war. Everybody was silenced. You couldn't practice your Judaism, and many did leave. When it was finally possible for Jews to leave, many did. There was the big refusenikt period, but many stories have never been told. But Jewish people did pen their stories. They wrote them secretly. They wrote them, they hid them. Some of the stories were locked up in KGB archives, and some of those stories have now come to us, translating them. And we are helping them to be heard in English. And this has been a huge change for them. This has given them so much empowerment because finally their stories are being able to be accessed in the wider world. And what we've discovered is that when we started our work as a charity, the people were Jewish and non-Jewish were discovering that they have a powerful story. They're discovering that they have a Jewish story. The story of the Jews of Belarus has not yet been told. And together we are encouraging people to go out and discover what they have in their towns and their villages. So it's very small at the moment, on a very small scale in different parts of the country, we are encouraging people to discover the provenance of the buildings in their towns. And what they're discovering is that practically every building has a Jewish story. And it's a journey that they're going on together, Jewish people and non-Jewish. And when you discover this together, it doesn't give room for anti-Semitism because there is this togetherness. It's one of the reasons why we're called the Together Plan. And what we've said to the Belarusian authorities, and we know that that's not the most easiest part of the world to work in, and politically it's challenging, and it's a very hard country to work in. They're not stopping the work that we're doing. In a lot of situations, they are, we've said to them, work with us. It's important because ultimately this will become a cultural route, which will be a tourist product for you, which will help those local communities who have built their local heritage trails to have a sustainable income. It can bring people to their towns to walk their trails, to listen to the audio tours that they will build and are building at the moment with our help. And money that can be raised on that can help them to put it into their communities, into their community buildings, maybe even to sustain synagogue buildings in the future. It's a fascinating project to be a part of, and from a sociology point of view, people are really engaging. There is this now a yearning from people, particularly young people, who really want to engage in this. They really want to be a part of it. And it's also connecting people across the globe because more people who are finding this are interested and want to make connections to those people in Belarus who are discovering their history, which is also the history of their families wherever they are in the world. So it's a very connecting project. And if we do these things together, then for me, it eradicates those opportunities for anti-Semitism to creep in.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you, Esther.
Thank you, Deborah.
Okay, and what I want to do is, before we go to the second part of our program.
I just have
Sure.
a short
Please,
story at the end?
absolutely.
Thanks, Jeffrey. I think the miracle for those of us of a certain age who have lived to see the breakup of the Soviet Union is that these things are even possible, whereas before that, we would never have believed we'd be able to travel, we'd be able to meet, they'd be able to leave. It is truly amazing. I believe it's important to learn about the history of what happened to the Jews of Europe, why the Nazis saw them as a threat or an opportunity for plunder, and how the Jews reacted based on who they were. My sense is that until we put the Jews as Jews back into the story of the Holocaust, it becomes a story of dead Jews who do not have any connection to Jews and Jewish aspirations today. By bringing the Jewish story into the history of the Holocaust, by learning together about Jews, do we have any hope of chipping away at some of the hatred swirling around us? If we can create community like what Deborah is doing in Belarus, who can learn together about Jewish history and culture, we may have a hope of inoculating some against the anti-Semitism that seems to be on the rise. In closing, I'd like to tell you one of my favorite stories that exemplifies why Jews and Judaism and the Shoah is different. It's a Hanukkah story, and as we've just come through Hanukkah, it seems appropriate. Hugo Grimm came to the UK with the Boys, a group of orphan children who Britain allowed into the country in 1945. Hugo Grimm later became a well-known rabbi. He relates this incident to Martin, which Martin included in his book, Holocaust Journey. Hugo was 14 at the time, with his father in the German camp Liberos. He says, "It was the cold winter of 1944, and although we had nothing like calendars, My father, who was my fellow prisoner there, took me and some of our friends to a corner in our barrack. He announced that it was the eve of Hanukkah, produced a curious-shaped clay bowl, and began to light a wick immersed in his precious but now melted margarine ration. Before he could recite the blessing, I protested at this waste of food. He looked at me, then at the lamp, and finally said, "You and I have seen that it is possible to live up to 3 weeks without food. We once lived almost 3 days without water. But you cannot live properly for 3 minutes without hope." I don't know if hope is an original Jewish concept, but it has kept us going for thousands of years. Thank you. Over to you, Jeffrey.
Well, I love that you're here, that you provided such a historical perspective on what we all know, but maybe not so cohesively. So I really appreciate how you brought this forward. I want to open the next phase of our program to the audience. And I want to ask them, I didn't see any questions in chat, so you had them all. Like, as they say, if you were live, you could hear a pin drop, so that was kind of cool. But I also want those in the audience to click on the reactions button. And again, you see my hand go up in the air right there. I would like to see if anybody in the audience, we have quite a group of people here, who would like to ask Esther any questions on her program, and you can ask a question beyond her program. So is there any questions from the audience? We do have a second part of our program, but I do want to stop here and address any questions. So I'm looking for hands through the screens. And so far, no, I am in the screen. Hello, Ruth. Wave your hand, Ruth, so we can hear you. Maybe you can unmute yourself. I want to introduce Ruth. Ruth is a survivor from Vienna as a child. So she's along the program. So you can unmute and say hello to everyone, Ruth.
Hello, and thank you, Esther. And I just want to say that the windup of what she said was so important. I'm glad you gave her the time to add that in. We need hope. We're confronted with terrible anti-Semitism ever since Judaism became a religion. And yet that kept us alive was hope. And that was so relevant. And thank you again.
And Benjamin, I'll give you an opportunity. Benjamin is a survivor. He's a colleague in San Diego here where I am. So Benjamin, if you have anything to ask or have anything to say, you can unmute yourself and present.
No, I've got nothing to say. I lived through it, and with sometimes opportunity, I'll tell my story.
All right, very good. And Ursula, unmute yourself, please. Maybe you can tell quickly your angle. You have to unmute. Just hit the unmute button, please. There you go.
I'm not good in speaking on the spot. I have to think
Okay.
about what I heard.
All right, I'll come back, think about it. And Louise, please unmute yourself. There you go.
I think I don't want to say things are wrong. I don't want to say anything wrong, but how do we teach the Holocaust? Does it work to create less anti-Semitism? I don't know if it has.
Well,
I don't know.
That's the overall challenge, and we're all here.
That's the only challenge. And the other thing that I was interested in was how relevant. What was the question? There was one of the. I'm sorry. Let me go back because I was looking up this morning. is the Jewish aspect of the Holocaust important? Yes, it is, obviously. But there's been a lot of genocides around the world. And I think something that happens now, I live within a Black community, and there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of conflict between the Black and the Jewish community. And it almost becomes a competition of who has suffered more. And there's a lot of resentment that the Holocaust is not American history, it's European history. And how do they build a Holocaust museum before a Black History Museum? So I'm neutral on these things because my focus has always been about the Holocaust in Europe. But I think at this point in history, with everything going on, that genocide has to, well, I feel that it should fall under one umbrella. You know, the Jews of Europe were certainly the first, you know, and very significant.
Okay, Louise, let's see if anybody.
I'm sorry,
That's
sorry,
okay.
I'm rambling.
That's okay. Let's see if we have some people who in the group. I know, Esther, you want to answer that, take a crack at that? Maybe Joanne Gilbert, who is a Holocaust educator, maybe wants to take a crack at it. I know it's difficult to talk off the fly, but why don't you think about that question? Does anybody have an immediate answer?
Could I just say, Louise, that I understand, those are not the right words, that between the African American community and the Jewish community. And it's something that I never could understand because we were slaves. We remember that every year. We were slaves. And it seems to me it should be a bonding thing, and there should be an understanding between the Jewish community and the African American community, or the Black community wherever in the world, who've had that slavery experience in their history. Jews were among the first to go and be involved in the civil rights movement, and again, maybe it's the history that isn't taught and that isn't talked about. But there are a lot of stresses in societies wherever we are. It's a very stressful and frightening period. And hopefully by doing what Deborah's doing in Belarus, by getting people to sit down and talk to each other away from social media, which is creating a lot of the poison, if we can get to know each other and sit down and share a meal and talk with each other and listen to each other and be open to each other, that's at least a beginning. And we seem very far away from that at this point.
Jennifer, I want to have your hand raised. Please also unmute yourself and give us a little bit of background so everyone who can knows who you are to be able to ask. So go ahead.
Sure. I did see the person next, I don't know his name, Kaush.
Yes,
Yeah,
I have him on
raising
the.
his hand for longer. Okay.
Yeah,
Go ahead. I'll get to you,
okay.
Kaush, in a second. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Jen.
no, thanks. Yeah, go ahead, Jennifer. I'll wait till
You
you're
sure?
finished.
Okay.
Live long,
I'll
prosper.
try to be quick. First of all, I just want to thank Jeffrey for these. I've just gotten involved in this particular group, and I'm so impressed with Jeffrey's programs. So thank you. And Esther, really, really, I appreciate it. My name's Jennifer Ruddick-Zunikoff. I'm a Jewish educator, Holocaust educator, and specifically a Jewish storyteller who works.
Where are you located?
Oh, in Baltimore, Maryland.
Okay.
So I work with Holocaust education in the form of storytelling, and helping to tell the individual stories as they connect to our greater story. And so also have kind of my hand in a social, where I founded a social justice organization that's more in general, not Jewish, just for educators in general. So I come with that kind of educator storytelling hat in secular community and also in the Jewish community and sometimes the interfaith community. And I think that that Esther's point of the specificity of the Jewish community and this being a Jewish question, and of course the Holocaust having to be seen through a Jewish lens, absolutely being a singular but in the effect being on the Jewish community predominantly. And at the same time, that just like Louise was saying, we shouldn't have this competition. Genocide is happening in the world right now with the Uyghur people in China. There is a genocide. So many, I work with immigrants and refugees and have heard so many stories that are as frightful as the stories we've heard in an individual basis of the Holocaust. And yet these are different events that must each be seen through the lens of the religious and cultural group and also under the umbrella. And we have a right and a responsibility to keep those separate and together. And that's the challenge. And some of us will go more for the Jewish lens of the Holocaust, as we should, and some of us will be looking at it more in the general genocide lens, which others should. So I just want to put that out, that they all have to be done, and they all have to be done yesterday. And I'm so glad that Esther's taking this Jewish lens, because that has to continue. It would break all of our hearts and the hearts of our ancestors to not look at this through the Jewish lens. But we're also part of the world community, and we need that too. So thank you. I would love to keep in touch with this group and talk to many of you personally and as a group in the future. Thank you so much, Jeffrey.
Thanks,
and
Jennifer. Kaush, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. Thanks, Jeffrey, and thanks, Esther. I mean, profoundly moving. I learned so much. I've always been learning. It's actually the important point. Like I'm obviously I'm not Jewish. Is the objective fact is Jews have suffered the most compared to any other group. Now, this is not to undermine our others, because the very profound point by Louise about the African Americans and the Native Americans who are also getting recognized. And it's just a bit hurtful to see that there is some sort of friction, that animosity among some of the members of that group. They're thinking that Jews are privileged. That's not true. Martin Luther King was an avowed Zionist. He was vocally a supporter of Zionism. Another thing about Zionism is people who are anti-Zionist are anti-Semitic. There's no doubt about that. It's because of ignorance, obviously. They don't understand Zionism was about protecting Jews, from all those atrocities, Jews, and it's basically a humane movement. And what people don't also know is the country that has the most number of Zionist supporters in the world. Can anybody guess? You guys go ahead. Which country has the most number of Zionist supporters? You can Google it and find it out yourself.
Go ahead, tell us.
It's India. It's India. No, and even I didn't know that India has the most number of, statistically, the highest number of Zionist supporters. So it's not just there are people who are not Jews who are actually proud to be associated with Zionism. So these are all knowledge which perspectives people do not have. The point I wanted to make here is that unless people actually express truths about Jewish philanthropy and Israeli philanthropy, which people do not know, most people do not know even now, is the fact that I don't know how many have heard about Sir Walter Mordecai Hafkins. He was sent by Her Majesty to India as a viceroy when India was under British administration to save people from cholera, because there were people dying by millions. And he actually tested a medication on himself before inoculating people. And he fell sick. He almost died. But then he felt that sacrifice was worth it. Like he did, luckily he survived. And I have written an article about him. And it is in Life Before Holocaust. And here's his picture. He's got a stamp. There's an Indian stamp about him. I would love to show you. See, this is him. This is Sir Mo. He's a hero in India. And you can,
You can't see it on screen, but do me a favor, put the URL of the article so people can see it. We'll move on.
Exactly.
Tamara, I saw that you just put something in chat. Please, if you can open up your, unmute yourselves and speak so we can then see you come up on the tiles. And I would like you to ask the question or state what you said in chat, because I think it's very relevant. Here. Let me see. Tamara, are you with us?
Yeah, sorry, I'm on my phone, so it's a little bit difficult.
Okay.
Can you read what I wrote?
Can I read for the group? Absolutely. Hold on a second.
Thanks.
So this is Tamara. Tamara, sorry. As a Holocaust museum docent, we always discuss life of the Jews in Europe before the Holocaust. We discussed the Holocaust as a systematic state-sponsored genocide, and its scope is different than any other genocide. We discussed the Jewish resistance, including cultural and spiritual, and we end with highlighting the lives of Jewish survivors in our community. Then in another exhibit, we do tie all of this together into how resistance and tools of discrimination in our own community exists. By teaching about the Holocaust and the Jewish experience, we need to also highlight other genocides to learn, to identify the warning signs and take the actions needed to avoid and stop further genocides. Do you think most Holocaust museums are doing this as well? So, great question. And who has an answer? Jennifer, your hands are up, but I don't know if it's from the last time or not.
I think it was the last time, but I just wrote in the chat. First of all, I love what Tamara, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing, what you just put out in the chat and what Jeffrey just read. And I do think, I know the USHMM, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, has an online exhibit, or at least information about the Uyghur situation. And I have seen, I live in Baltimore, so not far away, the changing exhibits about other genocides. So I know that they have done this. I don't know in the smaller museums if they're able to do this, with their scope, but I think that it's incredibly important, even if it were just a small wall or a small exhibit that can be put into a closet and taken out, that even in the tiniest museum, there is a connection or a place on a website for learning on what is going on here, and have that as a rotating piece while always keeping the centrality, if it is a Holocaust museum, on the Holocaust itself. And of course, within that, a centrality of the Jewish experience, while also mentioning the Roma and the Sinti and people with disabilities and people who are gay. I mean, all those things need to always be mentioned, but it is absolutely appropriate in most of these museums to center on the Holocaust and Jewish experience, in my opinion. Okay.
Ursula, I now give you another opportunity. You had a chance to think about question one, but you've also answered the question in chat. So please take the mic. Do me a favor, tell us a little bit about your background.
Oh, that's too much right now. Let me just say what I have to contribute here. There were two things that I have observed giving lectures basically in the United States, in Canada, Israel, and in South Africa, is that Jews once again are disproportionately represented in addressing the ills in various societies. Many Holocaust study centers have actually evolved into Holocaust and genocide study centers, to wit the Holocaust Center in Cape Town. And I live near Yale University in New Haven, and I have attended, and they have a genocide study center, which I attended their seminars for about 10 years. And actually also gave a lecture there about the legacy of Nazi Germany. If anybody is interested, they can send me an email and I will
Ursula,
send them.
all right, I don't mean to interrupt you, but to make your argument more effective, just give us a sentence or two about your background and your writing, so everyone can understand how you can say the things you're saying.
I was born in 1938 in Nazi Germany. I survived World War II in Cologne, Germany, which was heavily bombed. I found out about the Holocaust at age 19, even though I went to an elite academic school. and had no idea who the Jews were, lived in Israel for a year in my early 20s to find out who the Jews were, because there were none in Germany, and emigrated to America in 1965. I would say in retrospect that I basically fled from Germany, even in 1965, because the anti-Semitism that was still present was horrific. I've been to Israel many times. I have family there. And here I am. And then I published a book. I lived in the neighborhood of Eastern European refugees and Holocaust survivors in Brooklyn for several years, where I got to know their stories. And this eventually became a book that's called Tales from a Child of the Enemy, which was published by Penguin in 1997. And then I also did research on the second generation from both sides, and that book is now being e-published. It's in the process of being e-published.
Okay, thank you. That gives everyone a sense. Now you can continue if you have a continuation, but people now have a better sense of who you are. Thank you.
Well, I would say I would agree with Ms. Gilbert that the Holocaust is absolutely totally unique. There was no doubt about it. I don't know of any other group of people that was destined to be eradicated, exterminated to the very last person. That is hunted down from country to country. So that there was no other group that I can think of. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, Esther, you wanted to add something?
Ursula, I just wanted to ask you, what did Germany do in 1 or 2 generations to change that anti-Semitism? And it wasn't just because the people who had been involved in the war and the Nazi Party got older and died. I guess that's also part of it. But what did Germany do to change the culture of anti-Semitism such that there are probably more Israelis and Jews living in Berlin now than in other than Paris and London, and probably anywhere else in Europe?
My answer to your question is not much. I was an interpreter and translator and worked at the Australian Embassy in the early 60s in Cologne, Germany. Most of my colleagues were 10, 15 years older than I was and had been raised in the Nazi regime. They reminisced about the good old days, basically every lunch hour. The anti-Semitism, but as long as I lived there, when people found out that I had spent a year in Israel, they immediately came up with the anti-Semitic comments. And I fled from Germany because I couldn't tolerate it.
Okay, Ursula, thank you. And Esther, and everyone, I would recommend to answer that question that you asked, Esther. There's a fabulous movie called Return to the Fatherland on Amazon. And it speaks about Israeli Jews going back to Germany. The millennials in Israel are leaving Israel and taking roots back in Germany. So I would recommend that movie. It's quite fascinating. I have a couple of hands still there. Kaush and Tamara, did you not put them down, or you still have something to say? So your hands are still, so go ahead.
Yeah, so no, Jeffrey, I think reading all those comments, I would just want to reiterate the point. It's really, I think we should study the Jewish experience in India. Like, I know I put a lot of posts, and why, like, Jews are proud to call India their motherland, but Israel is their fatherland. That is the attitude. There's a lot of love, is what I'm seeing. So when we think about Jews in Europe, it's a very tragic history, centuries of persecution culminating in genocide. But there, something very opposite happened. There was centuries of harmony. Then there was a voluntary aliyah made because the Jews wanted to lead more Orthodox life. That's the only reason why they left Israel. They left for Israel from India. It does not. So I think that aspect has to be studied. Why there was no anti-Semitism. There were regions where there was no anti-Semitism. That is good news, because in fact, there's a I'll just conclude by saying this true story. An Ashkenazi Jew meets up with an Indian Jew and asks, so what is your impression about what do you think about anti-Semitism? And the Indian Jew actually says, what is that? How can there even exist such a thing? They just never experienced it. Thank God. So I think we should study that history very deeply. about the Indian Jews.
I don't know, Esther, do you want to answer?
If I could just say that India was one of Martin's favorite countries. He spent a lot of time there. He in fact wrote a book on Jewish history for his dear friend Fori Nehru, who was married to B.K. Nehru. The book is called Letters to Anti-Fori. It's available as an ebook.
Magdalena, yeah, I know her. I have written an article. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Magdalena, yeah.
He took me there on honeymoon, and I had to get her approval before, even though we were already married, before everything was all right. But he loved going to India, and in the book he writes about the deep history of the Indian Jewish community and where it came from.
Ruth, go ahead.
There's a simple explanation. India and the rest of Asia was not inundated by Christianity. They are not proselytizing religions. Hindu and Buddhist religions are not proselytizing religions. And I've traveled extensively in Japan and somewhat in China, and I never encountered any anti-Semitism. They didn't treat anybody Jewish different than they would any other foreigner. And that is the reason. I mean, India has always been a country that accepted everybody. They did not make any differentiation. And Kaush, why should we obviously know that you're not Jewish just by how you look? Because you look just like a lot of my relatives, by the way. So there's no way to really tell by looking at somebody if they're Jewish or not, because they reveal that to you themselves. So that's my explanation about the Far East.
Okay, thank you, Ruth.
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Ruth.
Shiva, go ahead. Unmute yourself, please.
Thank you. I come from a long line of Sephardic Jews. When I look at my lineage, and I did DNA, which finally proved what I had been researching for many years since 1997, and I returned. I decided in second grade I was going to return. Why? Because we were raised in the Catholic Church. My grandmother, my grandfather, I mean, we go way back. And so when we talk about how religion has infiltrated the Jewish people and caused us, we're looking at like way back in the time of the Spanish Inquisition and prior to that. And so the forced conversions, which in my family still, there are Catholics and there are Christians. And some of them were very resentful about me returning. And I decided in second grade, because I was punished at Catholic school for a whole month for saying that, for interjecting when the nun said, well, the Jews were God's chosen people. And when she said, but, I said, well, then what am I doing here? Because from the kitchen discussions I heard as a child between my great aunts and my grandmother about us having Jewish roots, I was very confused. And I was only in second grade. So I was punished for a whole month. I wasn't allowed to play with anybody. I had to stand on the side of the cafeteria. A lay teacher named Mrs. Cohen, she must have been married to a Jewish man who had a last name Cohen. And she stood with me for the whole month during the duration of my punishment. And I decided in second grade, because my dad had many Jewish friends and worked for a Jewish man, that one day I was going to return, and I did. And with the resentments of some family members, which is quite a bit died down over the years, as they've come to know that I was steadfast in what I believe and who I believe we are, and I have shared with many of them, the anti-Semitism has subsided. But I have to say that this has gone on for centuries, like we've all said. And how do you fix it? My own personal life, I know that being kind, being generous, being listening to other people. I was a member at a Black church because my ex-husband is Christian. And so for 10 years we were there, and we were loved on by everyone there so much. And I have still great relationships with them. And while we're having this discussion, I'm thinking, I probably need to go reconnect with a lot of them. And I recently listened to a book that might help with that situation.
Right. Elshiva, where are you calling? Where are you zooming in from?
I live in Pueblo, Colorado, in the United States.
Okay, Michael, I see that your hand is raised. Please give us your thoughts.
Thank you, Jeffrey. My name is Michael Polgar. I'm from Northeast Pennsylvania near Wilkes-Barre. I'm a Penn State professor and I'm a Holocaust educator. My father and his sister and both his parents survived Bergen-Belsen as Hungarian or Budapest-born Jews. And so we were fortunate. I know less of my family story and more of the larger story, which I'm promoting to all Holocaust education students. I do believe, well, oops, here's my book. I'm trying to show my book.
Can't see it. Put the URL in the chat. You can't see it on screen.
I'll put the URL in the chat momentarily. Sorry. And I wrote a book called Holocaust and Human Rights Education. And it's a book for people who are either teaching or who want to teach Holocaust education. And specifically in response to the earlier question about does Holocaust education work, I would say as a Holocaust educator and as a supporter of the many Holocaust education efforts that are worldwide, as we're pointing out in the chat, it sometimes works. It doesn't work miracles, but it helps. I teach a course, I developed a course, I teach a course. You can teach Holocaust in the arts, you can teach it in the humanities, you can teach it in the social sciences, you can teach Holocaust in the natural sciences. I have colleagues teaching it about the chemistry of the Holocaust. You can teach all sorts of Holocaust studies in lots of good ways. And when the UNESCO people decided to do a study, they found Holocaust education is worldwide. It's different in different continents, as we've discussed. It's different in different parts of the world and different nations. But Israel and Germany and the United States were early on the Holocaust education leaders, and that's helped, even though it hasn't solved the problem of anti-Semitism, it's helped the students of the world, myself included, and learn about this topic when it was a topic that was met with silence for so many years. I think it's really important for all of us to feel that we can make a difference. We do have power in our Holocaust education work, whether we work at museums or with children or doing storytelling. Those are all great ways to do Holocaust education. And when we pair it with human rights, when we pair it with other genocides, or include it with other genocides, it's really important because then we describe what's called a cosmopolitan view of the Holocaust. I'm a sociologist, and a couple of sociologists wrote a book on this topic. Memory is different for different groups of people, but there are some ways that remembering can be shared and mutually supported, as well as genocide prevented, through a universal perspective. But just like our friend from Baltimore said, you don't have to pick one or the other perspective. You can take a Jewish perspective, as most of us can and do, and you can take a cosmopolitan or larger genocide perspective. There's annual holidays for both, established by the UN and established by Israel and the US. And it's a win-win. It's a both and for genocide.
Thank you, Michael. And we are closer than you believe. My wife grew up in Scranton, so there you go. And Scranton happens to be a sister town to where Michael lives. So that we have more questions coming, which is fabulous. Arnold, I'm not taking them in any particular order other than I see them on screen. So unmute yourself, Arnold. Let me just briefly tell everyone that Arnold is the former CEO of the Jewish Family Service in Los Angeles, and also was the CEO of the Jewish Federation in Louisiana or New Orleans. Go ahead, Arnold.
Jeffrey, I can't help but begin my comment by not thanking you, in that I am so impressed with the audience, how articulate they are. Esther was terrific today. And I almost am intimidated to mention my thought because it seems so simple in light of all that's been said, which I accept and agree with. But to me, the theme that's running through all of this and has run through this for centuries is hatred. And until we, I think, recognize that that's the thread that's running through whatever we're talking about and deal with it, I think we're kind of losing a major area that we have to really deal with. And I'm at the point today, I accept the ADL and all they've done and the Poverty Center and on. But I think until we roll up our sleeves and take advantage of the clout we have financially, politically, and so on, and really get back to really hammering on some of these situations, I think we're really in a bad place right now. Growing up in the South, the Klan was pretty active throughout my growing up years until I think it was the Center, I forgot the name of it, but it's a group that parallels the ADL, until they really hit hard on the Klan and bankrupt the Klan. The Klan was kind of active in doing things, and then the Klan went away. Trump, I think, has opened the doors to all of this hatred, and he's just let it flow forward. And until we really can put a tap on that, and I think it will take political clout, we're going to be suffering, and our children and grandchildren are going to be suffering unless we can kind of push this back. Hatred will not go away. The anti-Semitism will never go away, but I think we can contain it if we take appropriate actions.
Arnold, in 2 minutes, can you share the story with your pals in Texas?
With my what?
Your friends in Texas.
Yes, well, I maintain a good relationship with many friends in Texas. They will sign off in their emails to me, your brother. We're very close in so many ways, and yet they don't make the connection between what Trump has done and how that can affect me as a Jewish person by his support of white nationalists and so on. They don't make that connection. They support Trump because of his economic issues, whatever. Somehow there's just a break in their thought process when it comes to what is Jewish, what does that represent, and what is hatred, and what does that represent? They just can't put it together.
Okay, thanks, Arnold. Jan, I see your hand is up. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was thinking that in terms of...
Can I just say something? Just give a little bit of 2 seconds of who you are and what organization you're working and why you're taking the position you are.
Okay. I'm a co-founder of the Butterfly Project. We've been in existence for 16 years. And our purpose is to speak to children that are we actually have lessons on anti-bullying and choosing to be kind for kids that are in K through 3. And then we bring in the Holocaust education for ages 4 and through high school. And I really feel that I agree with Arnold in terms of the hatred part. We really need to deal with that and teaching kids to choose to be kind. And in our classroom, at one point, we had a student, we didn't know who it was, but we were presenting to a classroom, and this student had put swastikas up at their school, on their walls of the school. They had also, the one Jewish teacher who was there heard some things that were being said about her, about having a Jewish nose and so forth. When we came in and we talked about our parents, my husband's child of survivors, all of us that are in that, in this organization are retired educators and children of survivors. When we go in and we talk about not only the historical facts about the Holocaust, but also we weave in stories of what our parents have gone through, and mainly focusing on upstanders, the people who did what was right during that time period. And this boy started crying during our presentation. And the teacher removed him from the classroom. And afterward, we said, what happened? You know, what what went on. He was the child who put the swastikas on the walls. He was the child who said the anti-Jewish things about his teacher. And he said that he didn't know that it was real. He didn't know. And so
how old was he?
He was in 6th grade.
Okay.
In 6th grade. So when we talk about hope, we have to start young. We have to have hope that whatever we do will make a difference in the lives of these children. We've had Black students come up to us afterward and say thank you, because we talk about the lessons of the Holocaust that are relevant to everyone, no matter their gender, the color of their skin, their religion. And that is, the importance of perseverance, the dangers of bullying, bigotry, prejudice, and discrimination, the profound impact of upstanders, the importance of gratitude. All of these lessons are relevant no matter what the background of the student is. And we have the kids fill out identity charts, about what's important to them. And as we go through the historical background of the Holocaust, they'll see what would have been affected by them had they lived during that time period. How grateful we are now to be able to live in a country that we live in, where we don't have to worry about evil dictators, and no schools for hate through ADL. We're definitely a program that ADL supports, and I think that's where we need to start. That in Holocaust education is very important, absolutely, for people that are older, but where are we going to start with this anti-hate is got to come with the kids with smaller children. And even the Holocaust Museum has mentioned that they don't have programs for the young kids. We do. We're starting, that's our passion.
Thanks, Jan. Hetty,
I need to say something to Jan. I'm sorry, Jefta, but someone asked in the chat what successful education, Holocaust education would be. Listen to Jan. That's exactly what the successful part is. Getting people to think and feel it and internalize it. And you have to start with the younger children. But as a child survivor myself, I just told them my story, and a lot of times I had kids crying when I
yes,
and that's the successful part. And
Okay.
thank you, Jan.
Jan,
you're welcome.
Jan, put your URL in the chat, please, so everyone could visit thebutterflyprojectnow.org.
Yeah, the personalization too, Jeffrey can mention it too, is that when we're in the classrooms, they have biography cards of children that perished in the Holocaust, that were murdered. And they read about these kids and they identify with these kids. They'll talk to one another and they'll say, I have a 2-year-old brother. Oh my God, if this had happened to him. And that's where you start with the empathy and the understanding and the realization that we need to do something to make this world a better place.
Thanks for what you're doing, Jan. Hetty, unmute yourself, please.
Okay. Hi.
Where are you from and what's your passion?
It's a long story, but to make it very short, I grew up outside of Washington, D.C. I was born in Brooklyn. I've been living in Israel for 40 years, more than 40 years, most of it in the Old City in Jerusalem. And my perspective is probably very different than the people that I've been listening to tonight, because we live in a predominantly Jewish country. And some of the political things mentioned about Trump and so forth, Trump is not persona non grata in Israel. He did a lot of amazing things politically for us. And we have the very strong reality of terrorism on every border. So I'm coming at this from a different perspective, but Holocaust education is something that my children have had in school from probably, I'm thinking 1st or 2nd grade, on the age appropriate level. And we live hop, skip, and a jump from Yad Vashem. I'm not suggesting that this is something that we do on family picnics and so forth, but Holocaust and altogether with the internet today, everything is available to anyone who's curious. So it's not so hard to educate children who are interested and even want to know, at least from what I see. I have, as I said, I haven't lived in the States for a long time. But I really was very touched by one thing that Mrs. Gilbert said, and that is that as much as she knows that her parents were victims, that she owns that she was just as victimized. And I think as a second generation person, I think that it's something that I battle with. I didn't go through these things. I was affected by my parents' experiences and growing up in a household that had survivors in it. But to be able to acknowledge that the damage, whatever damage was done to them, was done in an indirect way to us as well, I think was a very important point, and I thank her for that one.
Thanks, Eddie. Yvonne, and that's going to be, we're going to take your question, and we're going to pause because we have a little bit of more of a very interesting program to present here today. Go ahead.
Okay, I want to take it from a slightly different aspect. You know, we all know the white supremacists were.
Yvonne, tell us a little bit where you are, your background, so that everyone can sort of understand where you're coming from.
Okay, I'm in San Diego. I live in San Diego. I've lived here for 40 years, but I'm originally from South Africa. My family were from Cologne, Germany. My father got out in 36, and it wasn't until about 10 years ago. I always knew that my family died in the Holocaust, the remainder of the family, but I didn't know till about 10 years ago that my grandmother, who at the time was the same age I was, while I was discovering this, died in Theresienstadt, and my father's sisters and my uncle died in Auschwitz. They were deported, and I have the actual German documents showing the deportation dates, train numbers, etc. Anyway, I grew up in
all right, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I want to say I grew up in South Africa in relative safety. My point is that not so much about the Holocaust as another aspect regarding anti-Semitism. You know, I know we've always had the white supremacists who wear the T-shirts saying 6 million were not enough. But the other aspect is, in fact, there are three narratives that are going around that have really promoted a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism. The one is the Palestinian issue. The other one is the apartheid myth, that Israel is an apartheid state. And the third is that Jews are white and privileged. So I think both, and I get many posts from South African friends of Israel. And right now today is a beauty contest in Israel. And the Black South African beauty contestant was under tremendous pressure not to go. And thankfully she went. And the new mayor, again, all of this was just this morning, of Johannesburg, beautiful Black, smart woman, a doctor, was under tremendous pressure as she got up to give her acceptance about the needs of Johannesburg. A group of kafir-cladded Palestinians came in and tried to shout her down. So I think these are the narratives. Unfortunately, I shouldn't say most, many African Americans in America and African South Africans in South Africa have bought into the myth of Israel being an apartheid state. And this is causing, I think, a lot of the new anti-Semitism. Its roots are in the huge migration of Muslims from the Middle East to the West. And I think that needs to be addressed equally with the Holocaust issue.
Okay, so we're going to take a pause here, and I'm going to bring back Deborah Brunner. And Deborah, as you heard earlier, hold on 1 second. So Deborah is a fellow at the Royal Society of Arts and an associate of the University of Hertfordshire in the UK. She's the co-founder of the Together Plan, a nonprofit. It's Deborah's mantra that together we can make a real and positive difference for a better, stronger, and more cohesive Jewish landscape in Eastern Europe, and specifically in Belarus. The Together Plan was established in 2013 to promote community capacity building through research, exploration, cultural events, and dialogue. And currently the focus is working in Belarus. The Together Plan helps communities discover what can be achieved collectively, working alongside community members, both Jewish and non-Jewish, to develop skills and knowledge while providing the necessary training to build a sustainable future. And I want to welcome to the program, we've kind of kept Deborah on the sidelines, but she's certainly not a sidelines player. And if you don't mind, Deborah, I'd like to take you into setting up the 13-minute video for our group. And I think that will give everyone a tremendous overview of the work that you've done. And what's very interesting about this video, it's done by a non-Jewish person in Belarus. So take it away, Deborah. Why don't you introduce it and go ahead.
So thank you very much. I will switch the video on in a minute, but I just wanted to sort of respond to some of the things that I was listening to. I knew that it was going to come back to me, so I held back. But several things. I know I felt Louise's pain, sort of talking about the sort of Black Jewish issue where she is. And in a way that's difficult it is, and I trust me, I know it's really difficult, but you've got the most important thing there is social capital, and you can bring people together to explore together. It's not your genocide or your history is more important than mine. It's an ours thing, and you can really, when you bring people together, communing, this is what I call community, to discuss this, explore this, to research it, to understand each other's histories. There's so much that you can do from a positive point of view. And just before I go into the film, we at the Together Plan, there is no, although Belarus was really the epicenter of the battleground between the Soviets and the Germans, and it was a bloodbath, it was an absolute massacre. While the Germans were killing the Jews, they were also annihilating the Belarusians, but there's no Holocaust education in the country currently, and there is no Holocaust museum there. So it really is a wilderness, and it's and that's why the people are very keen to come back to this. And when I was there in 2019 with a group, I was taking a group of young adults, and they were from America, Mexico, the UK, and we had Belarusians, and we were traveling around the country because we're building a Jewish cultural heritage route. The idea was to just sort of explore, let's just sort of look at the extent of how rich is the Jewish story here. And of course, everywhere we traveled, we found it, which you'll see in the film. The young man who was filming with us, was a local Belarusian from Minsk, and he was quite shocked that what he was hearing. So when we were in Minsk, and we met with a Holocaust survivor who was in the ghetto in Minsk and never left Minsk, and has only recently really found her voice. She was walking through the streets and telling us about the horrors of the Minsk ghetto. And he was shocked, and he said, "Why do I not know this? This is my city. I've lived here all my life." By the end of the trip, he said, "Can I make 2 versions of your film? One will be about your trip, but could I bring in a sort of a Holocaust element? Can I do some research? I feel the need to do it." And we said yes. And this is going to show you this is the film I'm about to show you. And just to also say, with a nod to Jan's Butterfly Project, because there's no official Holocaust education program in Belarus, although there are some people trying to independently do some Holocaust education, we wanted to, with a view to our community capacity building mantra, to give young people, and it is young people, you're absolutely right, the opportunity to explore their history. And so we have built a program called Making History Together, which here in the UK it looks like this. It's 6 packs that we send to young people, 12 and 13-year-olds, and then we run sessions on Zoom, but each pack has a little bit of hidden history. So it's very sort of enticing for them to become history explorers. And we explore areas such as identity and the breakdown of tradition and religion across the generation, anti-Semitism, power and leadership, and then repairing the world. And what we do is we just use the history for them to learn about how to be the best version of themselves, how to be change makers, how to use this history. And we do have lots of references to people like Martin Luther King. We talk about the Tulsa race riots and how Jews who had immigrated because they were running away hid Black people there because they knew what it was like to be persecuted. So there are these crossover stories of how Jewish people and Black people and people of all different creeds and colors share stories to prevent hate, which goes back to what we were talking about earlier. So I will.
Deborah, Deborah, can I ask you, it'd be helpful while this video is playing that you perhaps share with us how educators in our audience can perhaps see some of the materials that you're talking about.
So this is a very new project, and I'm going to put in the chat a link to the page where we talk about it, and we're running it on a very sort of small scale at the moment, but it's definitely something we would be happy to share with others and talk about with others. We ran it in its first year last year, and it was hugely successful. The parents of the children, because it's for 12 and 13-year-olds, who went on the journey with the children, were really quite amazed. They said it wasn't at all what they were expecting. We have lots of really engaging short films. I showed one to Esther earlier, or yesterday, and it wasn't at all anything that she was expecting. It was a very uplifting, hopeful story. And by the end of the program, we give the children something called a periodic table of character strengths. This wasn't created by us. It was created by a filmmaker in the USA. We've used that some of her tools as part of our program. She's Jewish, and she was absolutely delighted because that's why she was making these materials. So I'm more than happy for anybody to contact me if they want to know more about that. So I will now. And
Deborah, you can eventually, again, just put your information on how to contact you within chat, please.
No problem. I'll do it while the film's on.
Yep.
Jeffrey, could you send that out to everyone? Email us?
Just email it to me, Deborah, as well, okay?
No problem.
Thank you.
Oh, hold on, let me just make sure the sound's on, because that's always a problem. Yes, sound's on. Sure.
That's an area which used to be a part of the Minsk ghetto. The ghetto area was a bit larger further away, but there was a house here. There was only wooden houses, and the house here was, if you could imagine what a house looked like, is the house that the windows would be facing the ground. There was 6 big pogroms in the ghetto. And one day, the rumors around the ghetto about the building and the orphanage, that the kids were not just shot, kids were slaughtered with the knives. The Nazi soldiers came at night and decided not to use the bullets, they decided to use the knives. And they killed all of the kids in the orphanage, and only one girl survived. She was 9, she was a year older than me. My mom then took her to our house, and that's how she escaped from that, because she has hidden in a little oven, and Nazis didn't find her during the pogrom. It's the center of the ghetto that where the road is now, there were gates of the ghetto. To escape from the ghetto, to get out of the ghetto, was completely impossible besides the gates that were opening when the groups of Jews would be taken to labor to do some work, and they would be coming back. But all of them were guarded, and all of them sort of had soldiers accompanying them with the guns and dogs. So, of course, the Gestapo and the Nazis were looking after my dad, and then they, in 1942, they came into our house, and they were looking for the arms.
Пожалуйста, продолжайте наши, мы уходим.
Please
И
continue
вы
our story.
рассказывайте.
We are leaving
И
one by one.
боритесь, чтобы дети, ни ваши внуки
And
не
you tell
знали
the
этого.
world so your children and grandchildren wouldn't know the same history, wouldn't experience the same tragedy in the future.
Спасибо большое. Ой, Егорочка, приезжай почаще.
Only the names have been changed. Here, only the names have been changed.
Мы с вами находимся в Тулово. We're in Tulovo place. It used to be situated 4 kilometers from Vitebsk, and in this place, the majority of the executions of Vitebsk ghetto took place.
До войны в Витебске жило 37 тысяч евреев.
Before the war, the Jewish population of Vitebsk was 37,000.
Самые большие расстрелы были здесь.
The executions took place here, right from Rosh Hashanah until the Yom Kippur.
Вот в этих 10 дней ежедневно сюда привозили по 800 человек.
During those days, every day about 800 people were brought here to be shot, and they were shot in that area. Before the war, the population of Vitebsk was 170,000. And when the Soviet army, Red Army, liberated Vitebsk, there were only 114 people in Vitebsk. Just, yes, 114. So not even 1,000. And of course, no Jews here. Vitebsk is amongst the 5 cities that were mostly destroyed during the war.
Only the names have been changed. The story you were about to hear.
On June 22nd, 1941, the war began, and the Germans invaded Brest. And on June 23rd, a day later, the executions started, and mostly the executions of young adults, so young men, so 16, 17, 18 years old. This drawing is based on an eyewitness account by an old childhood friend of mine. It happened 2 streets over, where people were put into trucks and unloaded, and then the next day after this they were executed, shot. 2 old men were remembering their childhood and were very, very sad that they didn't have a camera to capture the moments they lived through, so they decided to get everything out of here and put it on paper.
So you are here. The place is called Hatin. Hatin is the name of the village that was destroyed by the Nazis, burned down to the ground completely with most of the inhabitants of the village. On the 22nd of March, the fascists have destroyed the village Hatin with all its inhabitants. In Belarus, occupants have turned into ruins 209 cities and smaller towns, 9,200 villages, and over 2,230,000 citizens have been killed by the hands of Nazi invaders. So the numbers are just reflecting sort of a general amount and reflecting how big it is. I mean, I would say that if it says 150,000 and it's been 220,000, it's still, both figures are huge. But usually the lowering the figures was a reason to show the less loss in people than the Nazis did.
But it was the first bar mitzvah that has taken place on the territory of the synagogue since before the war. We live our life, yet hardly know its nature. For from a mystery we come, and to this mystery we return. The death of those close to our hearts grieves and humbles us. It reminds us that we all must die. Like grass that grows in the morning, that grows so fresh in the morning, and in the evening fades and dies. So we end our years like a sigh. Let us think of those who died at this time in years past. How can we accept the reality of death? By remembering the goodness of our loved ones and by shaping our lives after their example. For the memory of the righteous is truly a blessing, to remember good people, and an inspiration for all our days. May our lives be always worthy of their memory.
Друзья, я надеюсь, вам понравилось наше путешествие. Я надеюсь, вам понравились места, в которых мы побывали, и вы немножечко смогли заглянуть в те тайны наследия Белоруссии, наследия еврейской Белоруссии, которые так далеки и так близки. Присоединяйтесь к нам, приезжайте, участвуйте, общайтесь, объединяйтесь. Вместе мы сможем узнать многое, рассказать многое и сделать многое для будущих поколений. Спасибо.
Very nice.
What was so powerful about that film is it was made by a non-Jewish person who really had no idea that it was his version of the film, and he felt compelled to build in all of the Holocaust elements. So he really needed to research it. And this is what we're finding all the time, that Belarusians they want to tell the story. They want to be part of it. They want to work alongside the Jewish people, and the Jewish people also want to just explore it because they were denied it. They weren't able to practice Judaism. For a lot of them, they don't know what it means to be Jewish. So it's actually a really interesting sort of social experiment, if for want of a better word, to build community and capacity build around telling this Jewish story together, because there is appreciation on both sides, Jewish and non-Jewish people, and it's proving to be very, very powerful and very positive.
Well, Deborah, it's a fabulous film, and I'm glad you were able to present it to the group. We are running a little over time. I want to, obviously, if anybody has a question, raise your hand. I also would like to know, is anybody in the audience, parents or family, come from this area that we're talking about? So Jennifer, go ahead, unmute yourself.
Yes, I actually heard Deborah speak at another event that wasn't a few weeks ago, not through you, Jeff. And I was so impressed, and I'm already sitting here writing with my colleagues right now with another contact we have in Israel who's working in Belarus with some of these small Holocaust museum ideas. So Deborah, I'm writing you, I'm writing colleagues. I'm already thinking so much. And the other piece is way, way, way back in my family. So my great grandfather, and I've just found this in the past few months, is from Minsk. And as far as we can tell, all that line, all the way back. So even the ones, people who died here in Baltimore who came late in life following their sons and daughters who were my great-grandparents, we found that they're all coming back from Minsk. So I really feel like this is a bashert with the Holocaust education, the Jewish storytelling, and the fact that my family is from there. So I am going to be in touch with you. Jeff, you were amazing at pulling people together.
It's the together plan, what can I say?
Very good. Any other questions? Please raise your hand, because you'll then pop up in front of the screen so I can see you. Well, if that's the case, I'm going to post something in chat because I want to speak to it in a minute. So hold on a second. So give me 1 second. So I am literally posting the program. Today was the final program for our season 2 of our group. And you're seeing in front of you a posting, the first post for the promotion of our programs for season 3, our premiere. And it just so happens that Ruth and Ursula are here and are presenting during this program on January 23rd on Saturday. So we're excited to have you. I'm really thrilled, and I really appreciate your support of the programs. Our group has just literally gone over 2,600 members since May of 2021. It's quite an exciting experience for me to be sort of steering this forward, and my passion for the programming and the Jewish programming is really establishing something inside of me that I didn't know existed. So and it's because of you all that are doing that. So I want to thank you all for coming and participating. We'll see you again in January. Have a happy New Year's and happy holiday season with your family. Stay safe, stay well. Take care, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, everyone.